Hi, everyone. We're going to give everybody a few minutes to get into the room, and then we will get started. Welcome everyone to our webinar, and thanks for joining us today. I will be passing the mic over to ASH's Executive Director, Laurent.
Thank you very much. Welcome everyone to this webinar and panel discussion on FDA's response to the 2013 petition requesting that the Food and Drug Administration prohibit menthol as a characterizing flavor in cigarettes. This was the result of a joint lawsuit by the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council, Action on Smoking and Health, the American Medical Association, and the National Medical Association. During this panel, you will hear from the plaintiffs, AATCLC, ASH, AMA, NMA. The law firm represented the plaintiffs, Pollock and Cohen LLP, and the Public Health Law Center. Before I introduce the panelists, some quick housekeeping issues, questions. You can type them in the Q&A box using the icon at the bottom of the screen, and feel free to direct them to a specific panelist. I will now quickly introduce the panelists representing AATCLC. We have Dr. Phil Gardiner, Dr. Valerie Yerger, and Mrs. Carol McGruder. We have Mr. Leonard Nelson, representing the American Medical Association. We have Kelsey Romeo-Stuppy, is representing Action on Smoking and Health. And Mr. Chris Leung is the attorney with the law firm Pollock and Cohen LLP, which filed the lawsuit on behalf of the plaintiffs. And representing the Public Health Law Center, we have Joelle Lester. So we'll go straight to the first question. And this is going to be addressed to Dr. Gardiner. And Dr. Gardiner, you know, the global consensus is clear on menthol and adding flavorings in tobacco products. The WHO Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, which is the global treaty, makes it clear, and I'm quoting, that from the perspective of public health, there is no justification for permitting the use of ingredients such as flavoring agents, which help make tobacco products more attractive. And many countries have already banned them and have banned menthol to protect the health of their citizens: Brazil, Canada, Ethiopia, Turkey, Moldova, the United Kingdom, and the European Union, which includes 27 countries. So can you briefly describe the tobacco menthol issues that have led up to the Citizen Petition? Why has it taken so long for the United States to take action? And can you explain this and what I've heard you refer to as the original sin? Dr. Gardiner, the floor is yours.
Look, thank you, Laurent. I'm a little background is in order. The fight against menthol and cigarettes in the United States dates back to the 1980s with the fight against uptown cigarettes in Philadelphia. We were able to stop that marketing of a specifically Black cigarette then. There was a 1995 brand X cigarette, which was launched in Boston. We were able to stop that then. In 1997, there was, remember Joe Camel? There was Menthol Joe, and of course, Menthol Joe was a Black camel. Actually, demonstrations were held around the country. We were able to break that up. The first menthol conference, national conference, was held in Atlanta, and we began to lay the roots for the understanding the science behind why menthol is not only a flavor, but also an anesthetic that helps the poison to go down easier. In the midst of planning for the second menthol conference, it became clear to us in 2008 that discussions were going on about the FDA taking over the regulation of tobacco. And in the course of that, finding that out, we found out that menthol was going to be excluded, that there would be 13 flavors removed from the products, but menthol would be left in. That's what we're calling the original sin. That's when you could have done something about this actually in 2009, and they didn't. By 2011, FDA produced a report that said removing menthol from the marketplace would be good for the public's health. What's most interesting, nothing was done about it. And then the Public Health Law Center actually filed the Citizen Petition in 2013. The rationale was that the FDA was dragging their feet on this process. Of course, we're here in 2021 and they still haven't done nothing. Series of localities around the country have adopted menthol bans. Chicago being the first one, partial one. The major one coming in San Francisco in 2018 that would citywide prohibit menthol. Today, last year, actually, June 17th, 2020, the plaintiffs that you see before you today filed lawsuit, an administrative lawsuit against the FDA for not moving on menthol. We got our answer yesterday that finally, after 11 years of this fight, that they're going to do something about this. So I think it's a major victory on the part of tobacco control folks. At the same time, we cannot take our foot off the gas because they're going to continue. It'll take years to make this ruling. And we need to keep the fight going at the state and the local level. At least that's what we're telling people. Having said that, specifically to your question, Laurent, the original sin didn't have to be done. Why we call it a sin is that there was a discussion between members of the tobacco control movement, Southern senators, and the tobacco industry that came up with the idea to leave menthol out. They didn't have to do it then, and now it's 11 years later, they're doing the right thing.
Thank you, Dr. Garner. And it would be really a shame if it takes a lot of years to get those products out of the market, even that other countries have done it. So it's nothing even that radical to protect the health of our citizens. Ms. Joelle Lester, can you explain a little bit more about how the Citizens Petitions came about in 2013 and why?
Yes, thanks, Laurent. We started a FDA-focused project at the Public Health Law Center in 2012. And what we wanted to do was facilitate the public health community's interaction with the federal agency, since in the past we hadn't done that as part of tobacco control because the federal government wasn't really a player. It was all state and local. So I called through a whole bunch of groups, and all the groups that were focused on health disparities were unanimous that menthol was the biggest problem, the biggest gap in federal regulation under the Tobacco Control Act, and where we should focus our energy. And so we came back and our team was searching for how we could best advance this issue as lawyers. And we decided to use the federal regulatory tool of a citizen petition to formally call on the agency to prohibit menthol as a characterizing flavor in cigarettes. And we did that in a group of 19 public health organizations and one amazing individual, Dr. Valerie Yerger. And the beauty of the tool of the citizen petition is that once the FDA has received it, they have to respond. And so like Dr. Gardner said, we filed it because we thought the time that had lapsed between the 2011 Tobacco Products Scientific Advisory Committee report and 2013 was too long, and that they should have acted then. And then little did we know it would take another 8 years for action. But the important thing, I think, is that we have arrived and we persisted, especially all of the advocates on this call. But the citizen petition's other benefit is that the agency, if they don't act, it can be a tool for litigation. And so we were aware of that in 2013, but to be honest, I never thought it would get to this point because I thought the agency would act because the evidence is so overwhelming and the authority is so clear. So I think that we weren't happy to get all the way to 2020 without action, but we welcome and applaud the leadership of the plaintiffs on this call and Mr. Christopher Leung, who is representing all of the plaintiffs in going this last step to complete the mission of the citizen petition and realizing the full benefit of that tool by getting the FDA to act. And then I would also just add, we only asked for menthol in cigarettes because back then that was the clearest evidence base, but there's a lot more evidence now. And I just want to also applaud the agency for adding all flavored cigars to this action, because we've learned so much about switching behaviors, and the agency could have just done the least possible in response to the petition, and they didn't. And we really welcome this action.
It's wonderful that they did this. It's a shame that it took so long and that it took legal action at this stage. So, Mr. Leung, as the attorney representing the law firm that initiated the action, how did the concept of initiating this legal action to push the FCA to move on menthol came about? Can you tell us a little bit more on your side? You're muted.
Thank you for that. Certainly. The concept for initiating a legal action in this particular case certainly came about after, taking a hard look at the facts, taking a look at the legislative history when Congress had originally directed FDA and the Secretary of the Health and Human Services to take a look at this particular issue. I was certainly aware that this was a meaningful issue that had a lot of that could achieve a lot just through saving lives and just sort of addressing the sort of health inequities among the African American and Black communities. And so, this had been an issue that had been sort of sitting around for a long time that everyone had sort of recognized as a problem that needed to be addressed. Certainly in 2018, it was encouraging to hear then FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb say that the FDA was going to take steps to create a new menthol rule, but it seemed pretty clear by 2019, after he had resigned and taking a look at what sort of administrative actions FDA had otherwise proposed, that the agency wasn't going to be doing anything anytime soon. And so after taking another look at the facts, taking a look at what the agency had done up to that point, it basically became apparent that the law could be used here in this particular instance to sort of ensure that the agency was going to be doing what it is that Congress had directed it to do way back in 2009. Courts certainly have a role in sort of making sure that the government does what it needs to do. And certainly the idea of litigation as a tool is not a new one. Certainly in the civil rights context, law has been used throughout that area to sort of bring about change from the government. Same is true in environmental laws, ensuring that we're keeping the government honest with respect to protecting the people. And so in this particular case, it was clear that FDA had dropped the ball. And so we thought that it was appropriate at this particular juncture last year to bring a lawsuit against FDA. We thought, as Joelle mentioned, as Ms. Lester mentioned, that the evidence was overwhelming. It was overwhelming in 2013. And as she noted, the evidence had only sort of accumulated up to that point. And so we thought that the time was right. And we thought that, litigation would be the best way to move this ball forward.
This is really a wonderful example of how litigation and using the legal system to advance health, to protect the health of all citizens. So really a wonderful example. And Mr. Nelson, you represent one of the biggest medical organizations in the United States, the American Medical Association. How and why did the AMA join this lawsuit?
Thank you. Well, before we brought a suit, we had been in communication with the Public Health Law Center and Joelle Lester, and we'd also been in touch with Christopher Leung of Pollock and Cohen. So we were aware of this possibility, but it happened that for reasons that nobody seems to understand, we were not part of the original Citizen Petition. So we had a little bit of an uphill battle to actually bring the lawsuit. But when AATCLC and ASH brought the suit, it made the road forward clearer for us. So we joined the suit about 3 months later. The AMA has two basic policies, principles, missions, and one of them is to improve the public health. And this case was very much along those lines. And in addition, we have policies adopted more recently of trying to reduce healthcare inequities and inequalities. And this case very much was along those lines as well. So it was really the perfect case for us. And I'm so grateful, frankly, to AATCLC and Public Health Law Center and ASH and Pollock Cohen Law Firm for showing us the way and letting us join them and add our force and our weight to this lawsuit. So I thank them as I've done before.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. And going back to this point, you mentioned ASH and ATLC and being the initiators of being the plaintiffs, the initial plaintiffs. So Ms. Romeo-Stuppy, how did ASH become part of this lawsuit? Can you tell us more about this as one of the initial plaintiffs in this suit?
Absolutely. So ASH has worked with AATCLC for quite a while, and we also knew Chris Leung from other projects. So I think it made perfect sense for us to be sort of the next approach in this. ASH does a lot of work on international human rights and tobacco control, and we often talk about protecting the right to health, particularly of vulnerable populations. In the United States, we don't often talk about human rights, but frequently social justice is used as sort of the buzzword meaning human rights in the United States. They're sort of used together. So I think that our international work, we've been working very hard to make it national and domestic and encouraging people to use these tools and these this vocabulary around human rights to make local change happen. So we're so happy to see that an argument based on a human rights principle has worked to change national legislation in the United States.
Thank you. And indeed, the report that you led with AATCLC on, against the committee addressing the fact that by not addressing menthol, the U.S. was not living up to obligations in treaties like the Convention Against Racial Discrimination, which is a treaty the U.S. has ratified. Mr. Leung, can you tell us a bit more about the legal outcomes of this suit in terms of the next steps given the legal outcomes of the suit? What exactly does it mean for FDA in terms of what does it have to do?
Certainly. So pursuant to a court order, FDA has provided us with a substantive response to the plaintiff's citizen petition, which is fantastic. At this particular stage, the next step in the litigation is basically to put together a case management statement. We're going to be working together to put that in front of the court by May 18th, and then we're going to have a hearing in front of the court on May 25th. Leading up to that case management statement, we're of course going to reach out to FDA and the Department of Justice, who is representing FDA, and we're going to talk with them a bit about the sort of timeline that they're envisioning. As we understand it from FDA's public statement, that they are going to be working toward issuing a proposed product standard within the next year. I'll just share with you that that sort of timeline feels a bit vague. It feels a bit long. And so we, of course, want to know a bit more. Obviously, we want the FDA to get it right. Certainly there are a lot of tobacco companies out there that would want to bring this thing down, but we think that the FDA is on the right path. We want to be cognizant of their needs and what it is that they're working towards. But obviously, hundreds of thousands of lives could be saved through this rule. And so the sooner that it gets implemented, the better for everyone.
Fantastic. Then there's a question coming that we would like to address to Dr. Yerger from one of the attendees. What are the panelists' thoughts on the ACLU opposing this, stating that it will lead to further criminalization of Black and Latino folks? Dr. Yerger, could you speak to that, please?
Good. And that's an excellent question. I don't want to just focus on the ACLU. There's a bigger picture here in terms of the interferences to us being able to implement what is really evidence-based public health policies. The FDA's agreement to propose this ban is really a good sign that the federal government is about to take steps to save Black lives and to decrease tobacco-related health disparities. So we have to acknowledge why we're hearing about interferences from within the African-American community. So let's focus on what we know. We know that there will be a decline in menthol cigarette use among African Americans. We know that between 1980 and 2018, menthol cigarettes were linked to 378,000 premature deaths, 3 million life years lost, and 10.1 million new smokers. And we know this, that had menthol been banned in 2010, about 633,000 deaths would be averted, including 237,000 Black smokers. So why the barriers coming from within the African American community? So one of the things that we have to understand is that all of this information that I just shared is not necessarily what we read about in Black newspapers, which is represented by the National Newspaper Publishing Association. And we've heard their statement as well against this menthol ban. In fact, it's not just the NNPA, there are other Black groups, Black law enforcement groups that have been shown to be funded by the tobacco industry that's arguing against this ban, saying that it will criminalize Black and brown men and thereby increase the interactions between them and law enforcement. So their opposition must be considered with the understanding that there are historical ties between them and the tobacco industry, which has been documented by research I conducted with my colleagues at the University of California at San Francisco. The relationship between the NNPA and the tobacco industry, for example, dates back as far as the 1940s. This relationship has influenced what health information and opinions are conveyed to the Black community. In exchange for advertising dollars and other support, the tobacco industry expects and receives support from Black newspapers for tobacco industry policy positions. Tobacco companies view their support of the Black press, for example, as also buying its loyalty and securing its favor. And this relationship with the tobacco companies is problematic because of the trust that our community places, not only in media that is coming out of the Black press, but also from our Black organizations, including the ACLU. African American readers across the decades assume that what they read in Black papers, what they hear from Black leaders, what they understand is a statement from a Black organization, is really because they feel that these entities, these organizations have their best interests at heart and assume that the information that they're hearing is complete and accurate. So with these historical ties with the tobacco industry, along with a documented money paper trail of a current relationship, these organizations are prioritizing serving the tobacco industry over safeguarding their readers, their constituents' health, even as there is growing evidence of the harms of tobacco smoking. And I want to talk specifically about this quid pro quo between tobacco companies and the Black press. It violates the code of journalistic ethics, which are standards that have been around since 1926. And they hold that journalists should deny favored treatment to advertisers and special interests. The quid pro quo between the tobacco companies and the NNPA violates this standard. So let me end with an additional fact. The FDA's proposed ban on menthol cigarettes and flavored cigars will lead to an additional 923,000 smokers to quit, including 230,000 Black smokers in just the first 13 to 17 months after a ban goes into effect. The FDA ban targets the tobacco industry. It does not penalize or criminalize the behavior of individuals. If implemented, the FDA's enforcement of any ban on menthol cigarettes and flavored cigars will only address the manufacturers, the distributors, the wholesalers, importers, and retailers. State and local law enforcement do not enforce the Food and Drug Cosmetic Act ban. We heard this yesterday from Mitch Seller of the FDA Center for Tobacco Products. And so state and local law enforcement can't enforce a federal ban on these products. So their focus, the FDA's focus, the law enforcement should be on ensuring that no illegal products will hit the market. So we agree that criminal penalties for addicted smokers would be harmful and exacerbate other systems of inequity. Effective, equitable tobacco regulation will address health inequities and save hundreds of thousands of lives. We must also deliver prevention, education, and cessation supports to the tobacco users who have been predatorily targeted by the tobacco industry. And I'd like at this point to turn it over to my colleague, Ms. Carol McGruder, who will add more on this criminalization argument that we're hearing from within our community.
Okay, Carol, please go ahead. You're muted. Carol, Ms. Carol McGruder, please go ahead.
Okay, good morning, afternoon, wherever you are. First of all, we're just thrilled to be on this press conference and discussion with all of our co-plaintiffs. We're missing the National Medical Association, but we send them our love, and we're very happy to have our African-American doctors join the lawsuit. With regards to the way that the tobacco industry very cynically exploits our legitimate concerns and grievances and the racism that has been visited upon us since we came to this country, it really gets my ire up. It really should make the African-American community and everyone else very angry, because the reason we have these high rates of menthol tobacco smoking in our community is because of the targeting. So we recognize, as Dr. Val said, that there needs to be some reform. I think we all recognize that as Americans, that we need reform of the police in our country. But one thing, we're not going to wait and let the biggest predator and profiler of our Black men and boys roam in our neighborhoods and addict another generation of our children while we get our police reform under control. We're going to do both of those things simultaneously and at the same time. And as Dr. Val talked about the NNPA, our newspaper, we want to talk about our Black law enforcement, who many of whom in Noble and LEAP and these other organizations are retired. I looked at the beautiful website yesterday for Noble, and I see all of our proud, wonderful African-American police officers who many times are fighting racism in the police departments around the country. And I want to ask them, why are they associating and hanging out with federally adjudicated racketeers, which all the major tobacco companies are? They are federally adjudicated racketeers under RICO, the Racketeer Influenced Corrupt Organizations Act, and they should not be, our law enforcement should not be taking money or associating themselves with people who are known to have violated laws. And the only reason that they're not, have not been criminally prosecuted is because they're corporations, and they've been able to dodge and hide behind the corporate shield all of the death and destruction that they have rained down upon us. So we look forward to our next steps. We encourage all tobacco control advocates. We keep going. We know this is a wonderful day, a big step, and it's the beginning of the end. It's not the end. When we enact any kind of law or rulemaking, we know that that's the beginning of the process. We enacted the Voting Rights Act in 1965. We're still working on voting rights for our people in this country, and we will be working on these issues for a while to come. So we're going to celebrate this week, and we're going to hunker down and get back to work and keep moving our cities and states to enact their own bans on the sales of these products until the FDA ban takes hold and the manufacture of the products ceases. So we look forward to that day. On yesterday, I thanked some people and I left some out, and I just want to give respect and honor to Sharon Sutton, who was at the beginning of this movement and helped to get menthol on the radar, to wonderful Jesse Brown, Reverend Jesse Brown out of Philadelphia, who led NAPPY and the Uptown Fight and helped to show us that we can advocate for ourselves and get these products out of our communities. I also want to give thanks for Ronald Kwesi Harris out of Chicago, who's passed as well. And then Bob Robinson, who's in stalwart and who's been at the helm of many things over this time. And I want to give special thanks to the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council. Dr. Phil and Dr. Val and I are the public face, but there are many council members back home in our state of California. We have met monthly since 2008 with no remuneration for the most of us. And we have kept this fight alive. And I'm so proud to be the co-chair of our council. And I pass it back to Laurent.
Thank you, Carol. And I'll get back to you in a minute because I have another question I want to follow up based on what you just said. And thank you so much to both of you for really demonstrating it was really a misrepresentation and misunderstanding of this FDA decision, given that this is really about stopping the corporate commercial manufacturing, distribution, and selling of a product. It has nothing to do about use and possession by individuals. And that's been unfortunately misrepresented on the news. But you also mentioned the illicit trade. And I would like Ms. Romeo-Stuppy to please maybe address the issue of illicit trade. And I want to go back to you, Carol, because I have a follow-up question for you. Kelsey, please go ahead.
Sure. So one good thing about a menthol ban that Laurent has already mentioned is that several other countries have done this already. So we're starting to get some research from those places. In particular, Canada has already banned menthol. So we have some great studies from ITC there. And based on their research, Dr. Yerger just mentioned this number, but it's important enough to say it again. A US menthol ban will result in over 900,000 people who smoke menthols quitting, not switching to other products. So that's already a good argument for not having an illegal market. If they're quitting, they're obviously not looking for cigarettes anymore. ITC's research also showed that the Canada-wide menthol ban did not increase illicit purchases at all. So I think that's a very promising example for the United States, and we'd be happy to share that research after the webinar as well.
Thank you, Mr. Romeo-Stuppy. I would like to go back to Carl McGruder, and then I'll start addressing some of the wonderful questions we have from the attendees. Ms. McGruder, as the wonderful advocate that you are, I'd like to ask you, what do you think are the next steps for health in this context, on the context of these FDA decisions? What should local jurisdictions do? And you mentioned it a little bit, but what can the audience do to support these next steps? What should be the role of the media, specifically in this context also of this misrepresentation that we've seen, even in the context of the media? Can you please tell us what is the call to action that you would like the audience to take on from this session today?
Certainly, the call to action would be to, first of all, to sign up on our websites. Ours is savingblacklives.org and also ash.org. We will be the ones who will be quarterbacking these next steps that we're going to be taking. So as I said, we're counting on cities and states to enact their own local legislation to prohibit the sale of all menthol and all flavored tobacco products, to not wait on what the FDA is going to do and say, this is going to be handled, because we don't know what will happen with this process. We know that there will be industry interference. We know that there might be lawsuits. So each city, county, and state needs to take action and protect their own citizens, their own children, so we do not have another generation of children addicted to these products. So our advocates need to get on board with that. We also need, and Dr. Val talked about this, we need services for our people. We have been perniciously targeted. And so with that same vigor and enthusiasm that the tobacco industry has been preying upon us for all these years, we need public health to have that same vim and vigor and provide us with services and extra special attention to help our people give up these addictive products and address broadly our general overall health and the social determinants of health. People smoke for different reasons. Black people notoriously smoke for stress relief. And as we make our way through our society and all the things that we have to deal with, so that needs to be incorporated into our cessation methodology that is used. We need innovation, and we need our public health departments across this country to open up an umbrella of services that they will render and specifically talk about, this is for menthol smokers, this is for flavored smokers in terms of the services that are being provided. We know there are lots of attorneys out there. I would love to see a class action lawsuit on behalf of African Americans. Marie Evans' family received $79 million for one Black woman in America in Boston. What are we due? All the millions of Black people, we lost 1 million Black people in these past 20 years. So we're proud that the FDA has taken this step. It's the beginning of the end, and we need to move forward, and we need to some reparations, health reparations, for what the benign neglect of our government, which is another form of racism, where you just let it sit for the people who are the least able to defend themselves. So those are the things that we would like to see. And we would love our Black press to have some neutrality, not to accept money and the largesse from the companies that are killing us, and to report facts as they occur about what's happening in our communities. And the first Black paper was called Freedom's Journal, Freedom's Press. Our papers helped to free us. Our papers provided they were such a pivotal role in our freedom. And a Black paper back in the 40s touched 40 hands because people couldn't even afford it. It was passed along and people read the papers. And as Dr. Val said, we trust our papers. And so they need to step up and they need to fulfill the role that they are supposed to for our community.
Thank you for this. Anyone who wants to comment on this topic before I go on to the questions from the attendees? I don't hear anything. All right, so I'll move straight on. So there's a question for Cliff Douglas, also who some of you may know and has been an attorney who's been very involved in tobacco-related litigations and legal actions. And his question is, please talk about the difference between characterizing flavors, specifically menthol, and the continued use of menthol in cigarettes in the event it isn't characterized for purposes of marketing. Will that enable the manufacturers to continue to use it in a way that perpetuates the cooling and numbing effect, thus continuing to facilitate initiation and impede cessation? Or is the picture more encouraging than that? And I think this is important because we've seen that in Brazil and other countries where that has happened, where there have been some manipulations and some loopholes that I've used. Dr. Phil Gardiner, please, I see that you...
Yeah, this is more a scientific question. I think this is the real question. Look, we have, in fact, the tobacco industry knows this. All cigarette products, tobacco products, have a little menthol in them. Look, let's just do a little circle here. Menthol is essentially an anesthetic. It helps the poison to go down easier. It has a numbing and cooling effect that allows you to draw on more nicotine and toxins. The more nicotine and toxins you draw in, the more addicted you become. The more addicted you become, the harder it is to quit. We know that it also allows for a deeper permeability of cells and allows the smoke in cigarette smoke to permeate cells better when you have menthol in it. So menthol is used for a specific reason. Why this question is so important, the characterizing flavors, your Newports, your Cools, your Marlboro Greens, and the like, have large amounts of menthol in it. But most other cigarettes, your Winston's and your Marlboros and like, they have some menthol in them too. And it would be, this is what's going to go on over the next couple of years with the FDA. It would be important to remove all of it, not just characterizing flavors, but remove it as an ingredient, period. And we will have to have a discussion about that because that's why they put it in all other cigarette products. Maybe you can't taste it, but then it is still helping the poison to go down easier. I think it's an excellent question. We will be responding to the FDA on this because I'm sure they're going to say, well, let's just lower the level of menthol. Having said that.
Thank you, Dr. Gardiner. And I'd be curious to hear from an attorney from the Public Health Law Center, from Joelle Lester in this case, as someone who's also very much looking at that and has also been looking at what has been done in other countries where some loopholes that at times have been mentholated papers, for example, still out on the market. So if you could address that potential problem.
Yes, absolutely. And this is a great question. I agree, because it's one of the truths of trying to regulate commercial tobacco products is that the industry responds by trying to evade the regulation. And so we have seen that with flavor restrictions at the local level, where instead of calling a product citrus, they give it sort of a random name like jazz. And so they're trying to get around the flavor restriction by not acknowledging the flavor, even though it is flavored. So I think that we can absolutely expect that to happen, and that for there to be sort of messing around with the level of menthol as an additive, just as there has been with other kind of flavor additives that also aren't necessarily characterizing, but they smooth the harshness of the tobacco product. So I think what's important here is there is a public docket. And so there will be an opportunity for you to submit all your good research and evidence of why they should eliminate it as an additive. They have the authority to do that. And the public health community has a responsibility to participate in this docket to strengthen the rule in these kinds of ways before it gets to a final rule. And then I think the other thing is the FDA has other tools as well that we want them to use. So while we celebrate their bold action announced yesterday, their work isn't done either. They need to be doing other things too. They haven't defined characterizing flavor for any of the flavored cigarettes. So there are those other flavor additives are still in the products. They also need to robustly enforce pre-market review requirements and get illegal products off of the market. And then they have the authority to implement a track and trace system that would help with illicit trade. So, the good thing, they are an enormous and well-funded center at the FDA, the Center for Tobacco Products is, because they need a lot of staff to do the work that we need them to do. So while we celebrate this moment, I think we need to be thinking about all of these companion policies that are needed to plug those loopholes. And the example Laurent was referring to is in Canada, after they banned menthol tobacco products, the industry came out with rolling papers that were menthol flavored, or a little like a little card, a flavored card you'd stick into a pack of cigarettes to flavor them. So it is like playing whack-a-mole, I think, trying to regulate an industry that is clinging to addiction and its profit margin with both hands. But I think that we are up to the task, and I think we can help the FDA be up to the task as well.
Let me just not only do I agree with you, Joelle, let's even take it a step further. The FDA Center for Tobacco Products could play a social justice issue here by actually funding historically Black colleges, by funding cessation efforts in the Black community, by apportioning some of this money toward the fight around this. Not only they're going to do what Joelle says, that's who they are. They're going to try and play these games, but they can also take positive steps toward helping in terms of this fight in our community. And I hope they would do, I hope we can do that. We will make that part of the public record.
That's a very good point. And there could be resources allocated to facilitate cessation, particularly for the communities that need it the most. And in the context of if the FDA doesn't act fast enough or well enough, what are the potential in the context of continue to use legal tools? And I don't know if maybe the law firm represented here, or maybe lawyers at ASH or the Public Health Law Center want to address that question, or if they think it's premature in this context.
No, I can take that question. Certainly, if FDA takes its time to sort of come up with a proposed rule, there are definitely legal handles that we can use and to bring the agency to sort of move more quickly, I guess. One of our existing claims in this particular case is one related to undue delay. Under the Administrative Procedures Act, once an agency is presented with an issue, it has a quote unquote reasonable amount of time to address and close out that issue. In this case, Congress had directed FDA to sort of deal with this issue back in 2009. And it's been a very, very long time since FDA has actually done this. And so while it's all good and fantastic to hear FDA take the steps that it's going to do, we've sort of been there before. FDA had done this back in 2018 with Scott Gottlieb. And even though they had promised to sort of take action here, they haven't done it yet. And so depending on how our conversation goes with FDA and the Department of Justice, we may need to bring a heavier hammer to bear, so to speak. And certainly we would ask for this court's continuing jurisdiction over this matter to ensure that, lives can be saved. Obviously FDA is trying to do the right thing. They're trying to help save these lives and help improve public health. And we just want to get them there as quickly as we can.
Thank you for this. And I think ASH's managing attorney would also like to respond on this.
Yes, I would. Outside of the US system and of this case, I wanted to mention something else we've worked on as well. ASH and our partners at the DC Tobacco Free Coalition and at AATCLC submitted a report that was co-signed by 97 organizations last week. And we submitted that to the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, which is a United Nations human rights body. And in that report, we asked that body to pay attention to the menthol situation in the United States. The United States has signed that treaty and is bound to the obligations laid out in it. So we want the US to know that the international community is watching as well. And I know others have said this, but the FDA is going to be a slow process. The UN isn't known for being a speedy process either. So please keep working on those state and local menthol bans because they're so, so important.
Then there's a question coming from Mr. Amos Hausner, who's a very well-known litigator and attorney in Israel, who's done a lot of work on tobacco control. And he's talking about the public relations point of view, saying that this lawsuit is so important, but he feels that it doesn't get the proper share in the media reports, the modified position of the FDA. And should be this correct? And I'd least like to address this to Dr. Valerie Yerger, please. How could the media maybe correct it? Do you think it should do more to really present that, especially in the context of what's the social context in the United States in this moment?
Well, my short answer is yes. We need the exposure. One of the reasons why the AATCLC was so excited to partner not only with ASH, but with the American Medical Association and the National Medical Association was to get that exposure. Dr. Phil, Carol, and I, and the rest of the AATCLC have been yelling and screaming about this since 2000 and before it was signed, before President Obama signed the legislation, when we found out that menthol had been excluded from the list of characterizing flavors. And look how long it's taken. And so to have the media provide and counter some of the negative messaging that we're hearing from those organizations that have a tie either directly or indirectly to the tobacco industry is critical. And we've been talking about the need to focus on local, especially local efforts, because that's where we have an opportunity to engage with those vulnerable populations that are disproportionately burdened by tobacco. So the local work is not only where good tobacco control has always occurred, but it gives us an opportunity to engage with communities, to be able to listen to them, because we need their voices and being able to find solutions that are specific for their needs to, in terms of cessation, in terms of educating, in terms of being connected to their youth, who are incredible messengers as well. So it's not just a top-down mechanism that we need from the media, but it's also, we need the community, we need those populations that are burdened by tobacco for their voices to be heard and to participate in the advocacy and the educational processes that are necessary for really addressing this in a very organic, very engaged way.
Thank you for this. A number of attendees are asking about extending this rulemaking to other products, to non-combustibles, chewing. I see some heads nodding. Joelle, would you like to respond to this, and maybe Carol or?
Yes, I think it's a great idea to extend it to all tobacco products. I think we know how menthol operates and in cigarettes to facilitate initiation. And I think we can extrapolate that it has a similar effect for folks who are starting with other products. And just to be clear, the burden of menthol in tobacco products has been disproportionately borne by African Americans and the LGBT community in particular. But also more than half of kids, when they start smoking, they start with menthol. So it is a facilitator of initiation for youth, and it should be extended to all products. And that is something the FDA could do at this time. And it doesn't sound like that's what they're going to propose, but again, that could be something that you submit your good information into the public docket once the proposed rule comes out. Because I think what we've learned a lot about switching tobacco products. One example is the phenomenon of Juul, where Juul sort of voluntarily took mango off the market and the users just switched to a new product, and then inexplicably took mint off the market but left menthol, as though that would not be a switching problem. So I think that, I think the lesson we've learned in general in commercial tobacco is comprehensive is better than partial solutions if you can get there, and because you're trying to solve the whole problem, not just move users from one product to another. The other thing that I think is important about this, which products are affected, is just because the FDA might limit themselves to cigarettes and cigars doesn't mean the state or local policies have to. And Dr. Phil raised the example of San Francisco. That policy prohibits the sale of all flavors, all products, all retailers. There are no exemptions. And so, go big in the local community. And the other thing about going big, in addition to doing the most you can to protect health in your community, is that you can evaluate that policy and provide that very helpful data to the FDA for its consideration.
Yes,
Let me not only is that right, and I think we're getting to it, this is why the local and state level fight needs to continue. Because what we've been saying is we need to get rid of menthol and all flavored tobacco products. That's been passed in at least 65 cities around the country. So the idea that we narrowly just look at menthol, no, we're looking at all flavored products because they're all a vector for initiation and continuation. And so I think your point is well taken, Joelle. When we go back to work next week, we will be talking about getting rid of all flavors. It's not just menthol.
I would just second what Dr. Gardner and Joelle Lester each said. Certainly, it's been the case where FDA or a federal agency has proposed a rule, taken comments from the public, and sort of decided, you know what, this proposed rule that we came up with, we're going to change it in a way to sort of reflect the sort of new information that we have. And so, I mean, I think it would just be most helpful for the agency to ensure that, it's hearing from state and local governments about what it is, and as well as advocates about what it is that they would like to see, as well as the sort of scientific and medical data that sort of supports that. I think the agency has obviously made it very clear to us and everyone that they are going to apply a science-based approach here. And obviously the science has just progressed since 2013 when the initial Citizen Petition was filed. And so to the extent that advocates want to sort of put that new information in front of FDA, certainly FDA has the duty to consider it and address it. And so I would just encourage everyone to do that.
Good. There's a question about, and I want to go back to this given that the attention it did get a little bit is like around the SPLU's position. And does the SPLU get money from the tobacco industry, or are they just misled by the groups that do? Valerie, Dr. Yerger, would you please respond to that?
I saw that question, and it's an excellent question. And there are lots of other groups that have, we weren't able to document it in our research. But what we have been able to do is document their relationships with groups that have been documented to have a relationship with the industry. What I think is a bigger picture here is when there are certain influential groups and leaders who are saying one thing, it makes it easier for other groups to just grab a hold of it and to perpetuate that. One of the problems that we know occurs is that individuals who have ties to the industry who are within a larger organization will use letterhead of that organization to send out recommendations, for example, of who to vote for or which policies to support. And again, within the Black community, you take a look, you see your organization not knowing the connection that an individual within that organization has with the tobacco industry, and you just run with it. One of the reasons why I think it's so important for those of us who are hearing things that just don't make sense, like why doesn't it make sense that you would want to support a policy that is going to save hundreds of thousands of Black folks? The next question you should have is, do you have an affiliation with the tobacco industry? Ask those questions, because these groups do not necessarily disclose their relationship, and we have to dig a little bit deeper. We have to start holding these individuals who speak out on behalf of the industry accountable, so that we just are not going to just suck in and be sponges and just hear what they're saying and think that that's the truth. We have to be a little bit more discerning And that's part of the educational piece that we have to teach our people in our communities. If it doesn't make sense, ask additional questions. Just don't accept it. And ACLU, I'm sorry to say, where are you getting your information from? Don't replicate something that is anecdotal. That
It's not even anecdotal. I've actually did some digging this morning since it's come up in all the interviews that I've done.
Well, here we go.
They've been taking money from the industry for a very long time.
Here we go.
Okay, I mean, let's just be frank about it. I got the article up in front of me from ACLU got $500,000 from the tobacco industry. This is 1995, 93. This has been going on for decades. And so that's why, and then I'm going to go back and look at their board of directors a little more carefully. You know, I can't do all the research before these conferences, but your point, Val, is right on the money. We have to be a little bit more discerning about this stuff. The tobacco industry is, so to kind of give this some context, why is menthol so important? The tobacco industry is a $220 billion industry, at least by 2018 standards. Of that, menthol is 36% of that. We're talking billions of dollars here. We're sitting up here, and as Carol pointed out initially, we've been doing this. We're getting a dime for this. We're working against predators with billions of dollars. Right. So yes, ACLU. Okay, I'm gonna not list all.
And you know, we've seen very few groups that are just organically pop up to defend the right of people to smoke mentholated tobacco products. There's very few people who just wake up in the morning and say, this is my cause, I'm going to do this. Because if there's not the money and the funding from the industry, we just haven't seen it. So I would like to see it. And I heard some terms. I was on an interview yesterday that when we say that we've been this predation of the industry, that we don't have agency. That, you know, Black people, we have agency to decide whether we want to do something or not. And it was almost like when Kanye West said, you know, we decided we didn't have the agency to stop to end slavery, you know, that we went on so long because we didn't have agency. So this is not about community agency. This is about advertising and marketing work. Otherwise, companies would not spend hundreds of billions of dollars on it every year. It works when you pay off the leadership of groups, when you infiltrate them, and when and you get their media. Those are the things. So if we were just standing alone to make a decision without having this entity, this disease vector, in touching every aspect of our lives, and that would be a whole thing. So this, and then I heard a term about vice. You know, that we're allowed to have vices like others. We're not talking about vice. We're talking about addiction. We're talking about addiction. That's not a vice. You know, a vice is gambling or child pornography. We're talking about being addicted to nicotine and having people see that in our community year after year after year until we have the legacy that we have today.
Very good point. Here we're not dealing with a choice or a behavior, but it's really an addiction. And by the way, I want to point that Professor Robert Proctor, who published the book Golden Holocaust, that good documentation that the industry indeed has taken hundreds of thousands of dollars from the tobacco industry. We positioned that in the chat. There was an interesting question about what was the reaction from other countries. Given that this is really about health, the reaction, what I'm hearing from our colleagues around the world is, what took you so long to protect the health of all of your citizens? Mm-hmm. And so I have a last question, with the very last one, and it comes from someone I do not know, Khalifa Lee, and she asks, will we be afforded the opportunity to taking the healing destiny of our communities into our own hands as we wait for the government to take their time to deliver to the communities who will be in need after this moves through? I would like to hear from Dr. Gardner, Carol McGruder, and Dr. Valerie Yerger about this question, to respond to this question, please.
Can I start?
Yes, go ahead.
Since I gave up my career as a clinician, I was trained as a naturopathic doctor, so I think very holistically in everything that I do. I have been saying from the get-go that we need to address the reasons why people are smoking, and to look at the demand side of the epidemic. We have to deal with racism. We have to deal with the inequities. We have to deal with those things that make life very difficult for us. And that has to be part of the healing. And Carol, I know you're going to go on with this as well, but I just needed to say that it's not just a matter of just stop smoking. There are other issues that we have to address. And I really want to stress that as well. The social, economic, educational inequities as well.
And I want to say two things, that in California now, our tobacco tax that was passed several years ago, there's a health equity provision in that, so that funding has to be given out to our own groups so that we can begin this process to build the capacity in our communities to address our issues. And that's across all of the priority populations, not just African Americans. And then we also have our Center for Black Health and Equity. So this is our national center, and we're going to lift it up. We're going to support it. We're going to grow it so that it's spread all across this country, and that we are the healers that we seek. And we want some funding and some resources to do that and to make that happen. But we have to be intimately involved in the planning and the implementation and in the carrying out of those with jobs and opportunities for our people, to be the healers to heal our community. And we have a lot of healing to do on many different levels. Dr. Fields.
Well, I didn't really hear the question since I was digging into the ACLU and actually found even more. We should have looked at it, so I will do that in my next interview. What is the question?
You're muted, Laurent.
What's the question, Carol? You can tell me.
Will we be afforded the opportunity to take in the healing destiny of our communities into our own hands as we wait for the government to take their time to deliver to the communities?
Well, I'm going to end by saying this, that menthol cigarettes and flavored little cigars are the main vector of death and disease into the Black community. It has been and remains that way. The pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, has just exposed the underlying health disparities and inequality that this country has faced since for hundreds of years. There is nothing that could be more impactful for our community and saving Black lives and making Black lives matter than getting menthol cigarettes and flavored little cigars straight out of the Black community. This is what I think. That's what I'm about, and that's what I think should be done. And I want to end it there.
And I want to challenge the ACLU to join with us and defend us, to defend our right to have a healthy community. Don't defend someone's right to smoke a methylated cigarette and kill themselves. Defend our right to have a healthy community, and defend our right, help join with us as we go forward before the United Nations for the elimination of all forms of racial discrimination. That's what you should be working on.
And defend your right to be protected from corporate interests.
Amen.
And I want to bring him back to that. We're going to need to conclude soon in a few minutes, but I want to bring back to these United Nations. And as all of you may know, within the UN system, there was a treaty that has been negotiated on tobacco, which is basically the global parliament on tobacco. And this treaty, which even the US was involved in the negotiations, one of the things that was done when a country did something very positive towards public health was offer an Orchid Award. So I want to symbolically, I couldn't get an orchid, but I want to symbolically to the public health warriors who've been leading this work on menthol, symbolically offer you an orchid for all the work and the wonderful work, Doc, you've done for public health. You've really managed to rewrite public health history over the years that you've been involved. Dr. Gardiner, Dr. Yerger, Carol McGruder, Joelle, and the whole Public Health Law Center, the Ashton, Chris Leung for the work you've done with Pollock and the AMA and NMA and all of the colleagues and friends who have supported this really important work that will save millions of lives. And as I said earlier, why wasn't that done earlier? Which is really what I'm hearing from around the world. The sooner we take action, the more lives we can save. So thank you very much to all of you for joining us today. Continue this work. There's going to be a lot of work that remains to be done. And really thank you to all of you for really doing this fantastic work and saving so many lives. Hope we will see many of you again. We hold regular webinars, so we hope we will see you again. Thank you very much and have a wonderful
Thank
rest.
you.
Thank you, Laurent. Thank you,
Thank you,
Ash.
Laurent. And Ash, yes, thank you, Ash.